With his most recent win in the first Cash Cup of the season, it has many people, mainly me for the purposes of this video's introduction, asking the question, is MrSavage EU's best solo player? Let's dive into it. In order to figure out who's the best, we need to see what the competition is. So I originally wanted to do a top 5 and figure out how Savage compared against these. My picks were MrSavage, Hen, Janice, Tayson, and Rezon. However, I also asked my Twitter followers, who do you think would fit into this top 5, and they had some really great suggestions. So rather than doing a top 5, I also added Teak, Kinzel, and Andalex to do the top 8. There'll always be a lot of questions on why don't you include Benji Fishy, why don't you include Mongrel. Honestly, it's because their placements overall across all solo tournaments haven't been as good as these top 8, and I feel very comfortable comparing these top 8 overall. This also isn't a contest of who's the best player, it's who's the best solo player. And if it was just who's the best player, this would be definitely different. So let's start with the big stuff, FNCS. There have been 2 FNCS titles that have been solos, the first one being FNCS Invitational, which was in Chapter 2 Season 2, and then there's also been the solo FNCS itself, which was in Chapter 2 Season 3. When we compare these 8 players out, a lot of things stand out here between. Now in the finals, we do have a lot of players who performed very well. We have Janice, who placed 1st, and Tayson, who ended up placing 5th, along with Andalex, who was 7th, and MrSavage ended up placing 15th, which was a very, very good placement, but not necessarily very notable in the leaderboards. However, it's when we look at a larger spectrum of how he played over the entire tournament where I feel like this becomes a little bit more prominent. There were 2 weekly qualifiers. In these, MrSavage placed 20th and then 15th, and then again placing 15th in the finals. And across the FNCS Invitational as a whole, he actually had the best average placement by far. Now, do I say just because he has the overall average best placement across this that he played the best? Absolutely not. Obviously, there's more weighting in the finals, and Janice taking home 1st. Clearly, in this season, he was the better player in this current meta. Also, the fact that his qualifier average was 42, so relatively close, showed that clearly Janice was a superior player in this particular meta. But I just wanted to mainly point out that in this season, which was an incredibly competitive tournament, MrSavage managed to be very, very consistent, placing top 20 in 3 of the weeks that really mattered. And despite not showing up hugely in the leaderboards in the finals, being 15th, he was clearly a contender for one of the best players across this FNCS. When we move over to the solo FNCS, things are a little bit different here. Throughout the qualifiers, he played extremely well and had some really good consistency, placing 5th, 15th, and 21st in 3 of the finals. One of the finals he didn't make, placing 232nd, but overall his averages were extremely good. He was actually the 3rd best average overall, so he was only beaten out here by Rezon and Teak. In the finals, he definitely had a disappointing finish, placing 57th, so other players like Tayson, who placed 1st in this, gained that championship, same with Hen placing 4th and Rezon placing 7th. Clearly he was outshined in the solo FNCS and definitely was not at this point really looking at solo FNCS alone, considered a player who would be the best solo player. Clearly, when we're looking at just FNCSs individually, Tayson takes the bag. He took 5th in the finals of the solo invitational and 1st in the solo FNCS finals. Also with some incredible consistency throughout the qualifiers of both the invitational and the solo FNCS. So when we're just looking at these alone, clearly Tayson was the better player. You can see that after Tayson, there's Hen, Janice, Rezon, and Andalex all have better average placements when it comes to the finals of a solo FNCS or invitational. So based on the final placements alone, I definitely wouldn't say Savage is the best solo player by any means. What I would say about this is that he's incredibly consistent in the qualifiers, be it either more of an open qualifier like the invitationals or a closed custom qualifier like the solo FNCS. And he's always going to be one of the most consistent players there. However, his finals performance haven't lived up to what they could be quite yet. However, I'm not just going to analyze the FNCS. I have 93 total solo tournaments and the FNCS only takes up 9 of these. Yes, a very important 9, however, there's a lot more tournaments that we need to dig into. So let's dive next into Dreamhack. And there's 6 total Dreamhack solos that have gone on so far. The Winter Finals, which was a LAN, the Anaheim Finals, which was also a LAN, and then 4 online finals, which was from July all the way through to October before they became duos for the last few months. When people think success in online Dreamhacks, they usually go straight to Teak, who managed to win the one in July and also the September one as well. Along with that, those two that was not won by Teak were won by Kinzel in August and October. So 4 online Dreamhacks, and all of these were won by 2 different people. So because of these 2 incredible performances, I feel like MrSavage's performances in these online Dreamhacks are overshadowed. In the first online Dreamhack in July, he placed 2nd. For the October and then September ones, he did not end up qualifying for the finals. However, when he qualified for the finals in October, he ended up placing 3rd. So Teak's 2 first places are very closely followed by MrSavage's 2nd and 3rd. I don't think there's any way to doubt that Kinzel had the best performances, making all 4 online finals, winning 2 of them, and then placing 15th and then 34th in the other one. So clearly, when it comes to online placements, Kinzel performed the best, Teak the 2nd, however MrSavage a very close 3rd behind here. And this is actually where Tayson drops off a little bit. Tayson made the first one where he placed 7th and then failed to make the finals in the last 3. So despite the fact that Tayson has had some incredibly good performances throughout the FNCS, that was not reflected here in the Dreamhack finals. Dreamhack Online only counts for 4 of the 6. What about the other 2 tournaments which were both LAN? Well, in Dreamhack Winter, which was in Sweden, Savage placed 14th, which is an incredibly good performance. A lot of the other competitors that we're comparing against, like Tayson, Resin, Teak, and Kinzel, all did not go to this LAN. However, some of the other competitors, such as Hen, Janice, and Andalex, did. Hen ended up placing 87th in the finals, so not really a great performance. However, Janice placed 13th, which was really good. However, Andalex placed 2nd and very narrowly went for that 1st place slot, only missing out on 1st by 2 points to Marine, or Marine, or Mauritian, or however you pronounce it. I apologize, I don't know how to say your name. And then Dreamhack Anaheim in February of 2020. And the only 2 players competing out of our 8 there were MrSavage and Andalex, where MrSavage placed 1st and Andalex placed 6th. The victory that MrSavage had at Dreamhack Anaheim was fantastic because he won that final game and the hype moment was so good, casted by my boys Bola and Shayo. The ability to perform at LAN in this different environment is a skill in itself, and it's a skill that MrSavage clearly has. The fact that he placed 14th at Dreamhack Winter and then 1st at Dreamhack Anaheim shows that he clearly has the skill to be able to perform in this different stress-lit environment. He also, remember, placed at the World Cup Finals, where solos he placed 29th as well. So he has a ton of LAN experience when it comes to these stacked solos, and clearly can perform and does perform in this situation. The only player I would say is better than him in this LAN situation is Andalex, who has placed 2nd in Winter and 6th in Anaheim, as I've already mentioned. Both incredibly impressive and clearly have the skill within them. The reason I state being able to perform at LAN as such a high importance is because most of the big tournaments, such as World Cup if it comes back next year, will be a LAN environment. And if there's any solo aspect to this, if I want to put my money on who I think is going to perform, I want to have someone with good LAN experience already. Looking at the list of the other teams who were there, Tayson and Resin both have not been to a LAN yet. Obviously, coronavirus and the COVID situation have stopped LANs a little bit this year, so I'm not holding that against them. I'm not necessarily going to say they're bad LAN players by any means, they just don't have any experience there. Hen only playing in the Dreamhack Winter and placing 87th shows that his only performance on LAN so far has not been that great. Now, if there was a LAN right now, that may not be true. He could completely dominate, but just so far the data does not show that that is necessarily true, and that MrSavage and Andalex clearly have a history of performing very well in these situations. So when it comes to Dreamhack overall, there are a lot of players who have performed extremely well. Andalex, Kinzel, Teak, and yes, MrSavage. I feel like across all 6 of the Dreamhack solos, MrSavage's performances have been by far the most impressive. A 14th and then a 1st on LAN, a 2nd and a 3rd in the online finals. Then I would say Andalex in terms of Dreamhack was probably next, having a 2nd and a 6th on LAN, and then a 5th and a 14th online. Next would probably be Kinzel, having those 2 victories and qualifying for the 2 other online finals as well, however not showing up to any of the LAN environments. And then Teak in 4th place, who did pick up that 1st place in 2 of the online opens, however did not make finals in the other 2 and also did not go to the LANs as well. So when we look at both FNCS and Dreamhacks combined, this is where I feel like MrSavage is starting to perform a lot better than some of these other players who we've got him up against. Yes, in FNCS, Tayson clearly takes the bag over MrSavage here. However, Tayson falls off a little bit in comparison when we're looking at Dreamhack finals. When we're looking at Andlex's incredible performances, he's done very well in Dreamhack. However, his FNCS solo and invitational performances pretty much reflect roughly similar to MrSavage's, however less consistent throughout the qualifiers. So for me, when you're looking at these finals, these custom stage formats, I would say Tayson has the edge over MrSavage right here, and MrSavage has the edge over Andlex. However, what I feel tips the scales is cash cups. I know that a lot of people don't value placements in cash cups a lot, in particular solo cash cups, and I understand that completely. To me, cash cups have always shown a sign of versatility, however, to show that a player is capable of performing under a lot of different circumstances, play against all different types of players and all different skills of players, fight all different types of players, and most importantly, compete against all different types of players and playstyles. Of course, I don't put the cash cup placements in anywhere near higher regard as, say, a Dreamhack finals or a solo FNCS or solo invitational finals. However, I think it would be naive to not at least look at the cash cup placements and also include these in an analysis. In terms of how many solo cash cups these guys have all played, there's 66 total that they could have. The average amount of cash cups played, which dates all the way back from Season X until now, was 52.6. The only person who was quite low and under 50 was Teak, who clearly does not like playing solo cash cups when you look at his results, and Kinzel and Andlex were on the high end, playing 57 and 58. So all of these players have played a relatively similar amount of solo cash cups, but how about their actual results? We know that's what matters. Well, let's look at the number of top 50s, top 10s, and the number of first place victories that they've had in these cash cups. MrSavage wins every single one of these. He has 25 top 50s out of the 54 that he's played, which is 46.3% of the solo cash cups that he's played, he's been top 50. The next closest to this is Andlex, who's won 24, so just one less than he has. But because Andlex has played more tournaments, this is 41.4% of his tournaments. Next place is Tayson, who's placed top 50 20 times, and then Resin, who has done 18 of these placements. So clearly MrSavage is way more consistent at getting a top 50 than all of the rest of these players. But what about a top 10? Well, guess what? Out of the 25 that he's made top 50, 14 of these he has made into the top 10, which means that 25.9% of the solo cash cups that he has played, he has placed in the top 10. No other player is even close to this number. Andlex and Resin both have 9 that they reached into the top 10, which is roughly 10% less than MrSavage has. So that stat is absolutely crazy. If you think about the fact that there's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of players sometimes competing in these solo cash cups, and there's a 25% chance, a 1 in 4 chance that MrSavage will be in the top 10, you cannot deny how incredibly impressive that is. And then when it comes to winning cash cups, he's won 3 of these 14 as well, whereas Resin has won 2 and Andlex has won 1, and none of the other players on the list have won a solo cash cup. Yes, Hen has won a solo cash cup on NA East, however I'm keeping this specific to the EU region. Another note, Hen also placed 3rd on a Dreamhack finals on NA East, so if we were going to talk about who is the best cross-region player, Hen would take this with absolutely no doubt in my mind. His cross-region performances have been nuts. But I'm just keeping this specific to the EU region, because although finals might be laggy, they're not 100 ping plus server lag laggy. So overall, MrSavage's cash cup placements aren't only just better than the rest of these 7s, they are undoubtedly better in every single way. So that's the criteria. What about the actual rankings? One of the things I want to remind everyone is that this is just an opinion based on this, and basically all of these guys are so close at the top that a lot of them will be interchangeable and a lot of it will be preference, but I'll give my reasoning for why I think they're in the positions that I put them in based on the information I've already just given. Number 8, we have Teak, who is an incredible solo player. He qualified for the World Cup solos. He won 2 Dreamhack onlines. However, one of the things that puts him below some of the other players is the fact that his opens performances generally have not been as good. His cash cup performances are significantly worse than everyone else here. He also failed to make 2 of the 4 Dreamhack finals, and his performances in the FNCS Invitational, where he placed 60th overall, and then he did not make the finals of the solo FNCS. So definitely the least consistent that we've had here, but an incredible player, in particular winning those 2 Dreamhacks. In 7th is Kinzel, and all the reasons are very similar to the ways that I've just talked about with Teak. He had 2 of the 4 wins in the Dreamhack Onlines, which has been really big performances. He also qualified for the World Cup solos. He also placed 26th in the solo FNCS finals too. Outside of this, his invitational results, his Cash Cup results, and generally his other custom solo results just have not been up to the par of the rest that were just going to place above him. So that's what places him in the 7th place slot. From 6th to 4th, I think these are all relatively interchangeable, but I put Resin in that 6th place slot. Resin had incredible performances through the Invitational and the solo FNCS, placing 14th and then 7th in the finals respectively. However, when it comes to his Dreamhack placements, these certainly have not been as good. He qualified for 3 finals, being 56th, 57th, and then 70th in these, so definitely not showing up the same way he did in the FNCSs. His Cash Cup placements are obviously very good, however the rest of the list have just been more consistent throughout all of these qualifying factors. In 5th place, I have Hen. Hen's performances to the FNCS were also absolutely incredible, having the 2nd best average placement, being 10th in the Invitational and then 4th in the solo FNCS. However, what made me put him below the other players are just truly how consistent Janice and Andalex have been. For me, the biggest argument was between 4th and 3rd. I have placed Janice in 4th and Andalex in 3rd. Now the reasons for this: Janice winning the solo FNCS Invitational, a huge performance from him overall. However, coming to the solo FNCS, only placing 39th. When it comes to Andalex, he did place 7th in the Invitational, however went 34th in the solo FNCS. So relatively similar performances, but Janice just has the edge on this one. However, where I give Andalex the edge and put him in 3rd is the Dreamhack placements. In the Winterland, he placed 2nd over Janice's, where he placed 13th. Then Andalex again in Anaheim finals placed 6th, and then in 2 of the online qualifiers he qualified for, he placed 5th and 14th. Whereas in the online qualifiers where Janice has placed, he did place 3rd in one of these, however the other 2 have been a little bit more inconsistent, being 62nd and 29th. These 2 I think are pretty interchangeable, but I do feel like Andelex's performances, in particular because some of these have been on LAN, are a little bit ahead of what Janice's are. But I do think this is incredibly close. Between Tayson and MrSavage, who do I think is the best solo player? I've got to give it to Savage. Tayson wins the solo FNCS and he places 5th in the solo Invitational. By far the best performances in the FNCS. However, when it comes to Dreamhack, he only performed in 1 out of the 6 of these, not going to 2 of the lands, and 3 of them just not making the finals. The one he did make the finals, he placed 7th, but we cannot overshadow the fact that he performed so well in the solo FNCS. What gives MrSavage the edge for me is the Dreamhack and Cash Cup placements. No one on this list even comes close when it comes to Dreamhack and Cash Cup performances, and this just shows truly how versatile MrSavage is. Those placements, in combination with the fact that he's won a LAN tournament and placed very well on another one, both being Dreamhack Anaheim and Dreamhack Winter, that just pushes him over the edge, and to me, shows me that MrSavage is the best solo player in EU. Please subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. Peace.